Hello again. Welcome back to SimpleBibleProphecy.com. I'm Pete, that's Neb, and that's The Rock. If this is your first time here, please go back and see the introduction. It's only about 10 minutes long. It'll tell you where we were, where we are, and where we're going with this site, and just give you a basic overall understanding of what's going on. For those of you who've already seen it, let's go ahead and delve right in. If you remember, the last thing we talked about at the introduction was that prophecy was a puzzle. When I put together a puzzle, I like to do the four corners first. All right, the piece that we're going to talk about is the first major corner piece of the puzzle. It's the start, the beginning of all of end-time Bible prophecy. So I'm going to set the background for you. It's in 605 BC, right around that area. Babylon was the controlling empire of the day. Now, to give you a basic idea of where this location's at, it's in the Middle East. It involved Iraq, Jordan, Syria, Israel, Lebanon, some of the northern part of Egypt, some of the northern part of Saudi Arabia, some of the southern part of Turkey, and a little bit of Iran. Babylon's king, he was a ruthless king. His name was Nebuchadnezzar. And I'm going to give you an idea of what I'm talking about ruthless. After the Babylonians had conquered Israel and Jerusalem, the soldiers caught the king of Israel and his sons trying to flee, and actually caught them in the fields of Jericho. So they brought him before Nebuchadnezzar, and Nebuchadnezzar was so angry, he slew the king's sons right before him, and then had the king of Israel's sons' eyes gouged out. Then he sent the king back to Babylon to live in the prisons the remainder of his life, with the last thing that he saw with his sons being executed. Now you have a picture of what the time is like and what the king is like. So let's go ahead and go into Daniel chapter 1. If you remember at the end of the introduction, I asked you to read Daniel's chapter 1 and chapter 2 so that you'd have a better understanding of what we're talking about right now. So chapter 1 is about Daniel, the man himself, how he was taken capture, brought up in the king's court, and gives you an overall perspective of what Daniel was like and his personality. Now we come to Daniel chapter 2. The dream. This is the corner piece of all Bible prophecy. This is that first piece of the puzzle, the cornerstone of that puzzle. And I know I keep pounding on that because I want you to understand how important this dream is, how important it is to end-time Bible prophecy. If you can understand this dream and the interpretation, you will have a really good foundation of understanding all of Bible prophecy, because it all hinges on this dream right here. So let's go ahead and delve into it, and you can get a better understanding. So the king, it says in the verses, the king is having dreams. All right, plural dreams. He's not having different dreams. What he's doing, or what he's having, is the same dream over and over again. I don't know how many nights this lasted, but it said after a while he couldn't even sleep. This dream kept recurring. So this king knew the dream was very important. So what he did was he had brought to him what we would call in our days prophets or fortune tellers, magicians, whatever you want to say. I'll call them magi to make it easy for us. So he calls the magi before him and says, hey, I'm having these dreams and I need the interpretation. Now the magi ask, and it's a simple question, I would ask the same thing. What's the dream? And I'll give you the interpretation. And the king says, no, the order stands. You tell me the dream and you tell me the interpretation. See, the king realized how important this dream was. And apparently he was getting some funny business from his fortune tellers or his magi in the past, and he was going to cut that down right then and there. So the magi ask a second time. Not a smart thing to do with a tyrannical king. You have an idea what type of king we're dealing with. They ask him a second time, and he tells them, no, you're going to tell me the dream and you're going to tell me the interpretation to that dream. If you don't tell me the interpretation of the dream and the dream, then I'm going to execute you. And I'm not only going to execute you, I'm going to go demolish your houses and destroy your families. But if you tell me the interpretation and the dream, I'm going to reward you greatly. Now the magi begin to panic, you see, because they knew that they weren't true fortune tellers. So they tell him, you're asking us something that only the gods would know. And men do not dwell with the gods. Well, that pretty much set off the king, and he had had enough. At that moment, he issued an execution order for all the magi in the kingdom. He'd had enough. So the guards go to carry out this order. They're not fooling around either. They know if they don't follow the order of the king, they're the ones that get executed. So the guards come to Daniel's place, because Daniel was considered a magi at that time. That's the way he was brought up in that court. So the guard gets to Daniel's house, and Daniel begins to ask him what's going on, and the guard fills him in. Because if you remember in chapter 1, Daniel built a rapport with the guard. So Daniel asked the guard to bring him before the king. Daniel gets before the king, and all Daniel asks for is a little bit of time. Now the king grants him this time because his overall objective is to get the interpretation for the dream. That's his main objective. So Daniel, right after he meets with the king, goes and finds his 3 friends. And they go into an all-night prayer meeting. And I can imagine that was a pretty intense prayer meeting. And during the night, God, being the faithful God that he is, gave Daniel the dream and the interpretation in a night vision. First thing Daniel did was he thanked God. Then he went before the king, and even as he stood before the king, he told the king that only God, the God that he served, only that one God could do what he was asking, that no man could do it. And then he, just to show the king even further how powerful his God was, told the king what he was thinking about before the dream occurred. See, the king had been thinking about the future. And Daniel told him what he was thinking about before the dream, and then he tells him the dream. Okay? Now, the dream is, as the king's laying back, he sees a statue. And the statue has a head of gold, arms and chest of silver, just like in the drawing, belly and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and feet of iron and clay. And that during that dream, as the statue stood there, it was a magnificent statue that was standing before him. As the statue stood there, a stone cut without hands came down and struck the statue on the feet. This is very important. Do not forget this part. The statue was struck by the stone on the feet. At that point, the statue was demolished. The whole statue, even though the stone struck it on the feet, the whole statue came down, dried up, and blew away. Then the stone began to grow all over the earth and began to multiply and fill the earth. That was the end of the dream. Now, what I want you to understand is this. Daniel just got through telling the king what the dream was and what he was thinking about before the dream. So now he has Nebuchadnezzar's complete, total, and undivided attention. You see, only God could do that. No man can do that. Nebuchadnezzar is now sitting back waiting in anticipation for what Daniel has to say next. And Daniel doesn't disappoint him right away. He tells him, he says, "You, O king, are the head of gold." And Daniel even goes further to tell him, he says, "God said that he calls you the King of Kings, that you are in charge of everything, and that I ordained it and I put you there." Now, there's not many things you can say to raise a king up, but I imagine by the time Daniel had finished that portion of it, the king was really sitting pretty tall. But then Daniel tells him, after you, there will be an inferior kingdom, the second kingdom, which will be the arms and chest of silver. And after that kingdom will be a third kingdom, which will be the belly and thighs of bronze. Then there will be a fourth kingdom. It'll be the legs of iron. It will be strong, and it will crush all things around it. In other words, it will be a brutal kingdom. Then Daniel went to the feet of iron and clay. And he spent more time with this kingdom than any other kingdom on the statue itself. And he even told King Nebuchadnezzar, it will be as tough as iron, but it will be a divided kingdom because it mixes with the clay. And he concentrated on the toes for a little while. And this is an important part of the prophecy. Actually, when I asked my niece Madison to draw this picture for me, I told her to please get the toes in and make them distinct because they were that much of an important part of this prophecy. And Daniel goes on to say that the toes were mixed with iron and clay also because they will be partly strong and partly brittle. And that as the clay mixes with iron, there would also be something mixing with the seeds of men. I'm not real confident in the interpretation of what that means. I've heard several different versions, but there's nothing that I want to share with you that I feel strong enough about that I have a really good grip on. So if you want to do some research on that yourself, I understand, but I really don't want to mislead anybody, and I really don't have a strong grip on what I believe the true interpretation of that means. Now the stone, this was the final kingdom. The final kingdom where the stone came down. If you remember, it crushes the statue on the feet. And Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar, this is the kingdom of God. This kingdom will come and it will reign on the earth forever and ever. It will come down and it will crush this final man-made kingdom. And as the statue was destroyed, he meant that not only was this man-made kingdom destroyed, all man-made kingdoms before it were destroyed. Anything that had to do with those man-made kingdoms would dry up and blow away as if they had never existed. This is the overlying plan God has for us in the future. He gave us 3,600 years between a statue and a rock. Why a statue and a rock? Only God could do this. He is the God of stories. He's the greatest storyteller there ever was. He brought us Daniel in the lion's den, David and Goliath, Samson and Delilah. Only God can do that. And why does he do it? Because it's something easy for us to remember. You see, God knows what makes us tick. And it's going to be so much easier to remember a statue in a rock in a story about a dream from a king back in the 600 BC from a servant named Daniel. Only God could do that. See, he knows it's much easier to remember. And he gave us a picture to make it easy for us to understand. See, like me, it's easier for me to remember gold, silver, and bronze. I'm thinking of the Olympics. But it's something I can picture and something I can see. So that's what he did. He gives us something to look at. All this is an outline. It's a simple outline of the future. 3,600 years, all your major points, all your major topics. He goes back in and he fills those major points and topics later on. But for right now, what he did was he gave us the overlying scheme. Number one, Roman numeral 1 on your outline, the head of gold. We already know is the Babylonian Empire. Roman numeral 2 is the arms and chest of silver. Roman numeral 3 are the arms, is the stomach and the thighs of bronze. Roman numeral 4, the legs of iron. Roman numeral 5, the feet of iron and clay. Roman numeral 6 would be the rock. Each one a kingdom. And he just brought us through 3,600 years with no problem. And this was prophesied 2,600 years ago. And to date, 80% of this prophecy on the statue has been fulfilled. Not a bad batting average. And it's not over yet. I can guarantee you this much. 100% of this prophecy will be fulfilled. God is not a liar. His word is true. So I hope you'll join me in lesson number 2, because we're going to go back in and we're going to fill in, because history is something that we have to look back on. And we're going to go back in with the history and the knowledge that we have, and we're going to fill in the arms and chest of silver, the belly and thighs of bronze, the legs of iron. And we know that the future is the feet of iron and clay. That's the next kingdom that we have to come. I say we know that. You will know that shortly. But I hope you'll join me next time on lesson 2. And remember what Jesus said. because I live, you shall also live. See you again. Thank you.